Hello and welcome back. In the last video, I finished the block out for this character. In this video, I'm going to remesh the character and sculpt shapes and forms in a bit more detail. This process isn't as complex, but it is a lot more labor intensive and time consuming. My process for sculpting was relatively consistent for each part of the golem. First, I focus on a single part of the mesh, hiding everything else so that it doesn't distract me. Then I remesh at a somewhat detailed resolution. I don't like remeshing too high because Blender tends to choke when the poly count gets too high, and I don't really need a high resolution for sculpting forms, so I wound up going with 0.01 for most parts of this character. After remeshing, I primarily use the grab brush to push out the edges and contours to more closely match the silhouette of the model sheet. Then I would use the line project tool to flatten sections of the mesh to get a more angular look. I found myself making ample use of the scrape brush to chamfer and bevel edges to get this chipped stone look. I also remesh frequently during this process, especially when I get messed up looking topology. I recommend remeshing often when you're sculpting for form, but you shouldn't remesh when it comes to sculpting details because you'll typically lose the sharp, minute detailing wherever you remesh. After I'm happy with the forms and overall shape of a piece, I make use of the pinch brush and crease brush to really sharpen the edges and make the angle changes stand out. Remeshing tends to smooth these sharp edges out, so I found myself doing this as a second to last step on each piece. My last step is to unhide the other parts of the model so I can use the grab brush to nudge the piece I'm working on into place. I found myself compromising a lot between the character model sheet and the actual sculpt. I basically rinsed and repeated this process for the whole thing, which took about 9 hours and 40 minutes over the course of a week. We had some different ideas for how the core of the golem should look. The process for the core was pretty similar to the rest of the mesh, but as a prerequisite step I was using the curves I made during the block out as booleans to experiment with different looks. I decided that having a partially carved, partially hollowed out core looked pretty interesting. After using booleans to cut shapes out of the core, I did the same thing as before, using scrapes and pinches to sell the chipped stone look. This video is a bit shorter than the previous two because there isn't as much to explain, but the actual time and work spent on this step was significantly more. I also threw in some lighting elements since this golem is supposed to light up to reveal whatever it's looking at. The next video is going to showcase something less exciting but pretty crucial: retopology and UV unwrapping.